Welcome to the Classic Cinema Society podcast. Today, we'll tell you a little story of right hand, left hand. I'm your host, Christopher Pistol. Every episode, I bring on a guest to discuss a classic movie, and we talk about its place in cinema history and how it holds up. Sometimes I introduce myself as Chris Pistol, sometimes I introduce myself as Christopher Pistol. It's just how I'm feeling. Today, we're continuing our Noir November theme. Somewhat of an unconventional noirs for both episodes. We're talking about Night of the Hunter from 1955. And this film was chosen by my guest, Levi Agee. Thanks for joining me today. How's it going?
What's up, man? Yeah, when you said noir films, I was like, "Uh-oh, I haven't
Not your
haven't seen."
expertise?
Well, it's not through my expertise. I think I watched Maltese Falcon and kind of the
Sure.
Big Sleep and all the big ones, and I was just like, "It's not my bag." Like,
Mm,
I don't love like a super confident protagonist, and like Humphrey Bogart is kind of that guy. And
yeah.
so I was kind of thinking through my brain, like, what's a noir film that I just like really obsess with? Because, the kind of the 40s traditional gangster noirs, it doesn't hit me as much as like reinventions of noir. So like
Mm.
Brick or
I was just
Zodiac or,
I was about to
those
say,
kind of,
like, I think I tend to lean more into, like, yeah, post noir. Like, I guess you'd call that neo noir or
yes, yeah, yeah.
post noir, whatever. Like, The Long Goodbye is like one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the Shane Blackie type stuff,
Kiss
Inherent
Bang
Vice,
Bang. Yeah.
yeah, Big Lebowski. That stuff is like not really stuff that like has more of like I guess detective tropes than than actually like what noir is.
It's a movie that kind of, it doesn't feel like an old movie, but it is very quintessential of like old Hollywood. Like
Hmm.
it's such a paradox for me because parts of it feel very modern and then other parts feel so old Hollywood and so like DW Griffith kind of coded that when I was kind of collecting my thoughts on it, I was like, everything I say feels like it contradicts itself. Why I like the film so much, because it's like so brazenly a black and white movie, but it feels like it's in color. Like it's so
Hmm.
vivid. It's like it's there's a lot of hyper surrealism in it that I really like.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll get more into that.
We'll
I
get
kind of
there.
jumped the
We'll
gun.
get there.
We'll get there. I jumped the gun a little bit because first I need a little bit of introduction. Uh, we know your name, but that's about all we know about you right now. So, Levi, tell us a little bit about yourself and your kind of like film journey.
I was the inventor of Betamax and was really hoping that was going to
Wow.
stick, but VHS
Just missed the mark.
just won out. But no, I I have a really weird relationship with movies and film because I grew up in a really small town called Sardis, Arkansas. So small they couldn't even call it a city. It's called a community that did not have a real video store. We had like a gas station with like 20 movies in it. So basically, the only movies I ever watched growing up were like Rookie of the Year, Major League 2, Wizard of Oz, which was taped by one of my cousins off TV. So I remember all the commercials from like the 90s that were around that time. And E.T., like the green VHS cassette. And
Yeah.
that's literally like I just watched those on repeat for like 10 years. And didn't really think about films until I got into graduated high school, and someone showed me Donnie Darko,
Oh
and
wow.
it blew my mind. Which revisionist history, I'm like, that movie's fun, but did I need to write like an 8-page paper on it for no reason at all? Maybe, maybe not. But I was just like, oh, movies can be more than just like, a corporate or a Disney movie or something. I had no idea about like art house movies or anything. And so then I started watching like Y Tu Mama Tambien and Mulholland Drive, and just like really dive deep into like art house stuff. Um, and I connected with my art teacher at a vocational school that I was going to learn like computer programming, and she was making us watch like Platoon and Stanley Kubrick stuff, like as an art teacher.
Ooh, wow.
We were learning drawing, and she's like, "You got to learn like film and cinema,"
Awesome.
and she was like, "You need to be a filmmaker." Like she told me, she was like, "You, what are you doing like in computers?" And she's like, "You're a writer. You should be a writer." And like 2 weeks later, I dropped out and signed up for film school at UCA, and basically been obsessed with movies, cinema, making short films, working for film festivals for over a decade, nearly 20 years. I think I read somewhere, maybe heard you were at a 3 a day movie habit at one point in your life. That was me. I mean, I was
Yeah.
literally come home from work, I'd put in Bottle Rocket, and then move to um, Jim Jarmusch film, and then just
Hmm.
keep stacking movies. And I'd go to sleep at 3 a.m. because I worked at Blockbuster, and so every week I'd come home with six new movies, and it
Hmm.
didn't cost me anything. So for like 6 years, that was my film school. Even though I was going to film school, what changed my life was working at Blockbuster, which for you kids that are under age 30, that's what Netflix killed. And I'm not going to do that joke where it's like you put a thing in a thing and it plays a movie.
Right. Yeah. Guy
I get
explains
it.
how things used
why
to be.
why would anyone age 18 know what a VHS is? I don't know what reel to reel and stuff is, so I'm not going to be that guy. But movie rental stores were my life. I mean, I
Mm.
loved going to work. I loved recommending movies, and I think that's what's in my blood to this day, is like
Did you
telling
did,
people.
did you work in Blockbuster when you were in college?
Yeah, I worked 40 hours a week and then still did like a 16-hour credit course semester. And I was commuting like 40 minutes to school too. So it was just,
Oh, okay. So it wasn't in Conway. It wasn't the one on Prince. I'm getting specific now, which
no, no, no. This was in North Little Rock, like close to
okay.
where I live now on JFK. So
Okay.
yeah, it was like I was living non-traditional off-campus life and driving to school, um, 4 times a week, basically.
Would you say like the video store was like how you were like you said you were like discovering like Bottle Rocket or Jim Jarmusch or different filmmakers, like not just like popcorn cinema but like art house stuff? Was that where you were kind of discovering it, or was there someone
Yeah,
kind of
because
guiding you?
I would have customers that would come in and they would tell me stuff to watch, and that led to other things. And then I remember we had this book, because IMDb wasn't as big at the time, called I think it was called like the Leonard Maltin Film Guide or something like that.
Hmm.
And I would just read that nonstop, like that was my
Awesome.
Bible. And then there was something called like Movie Hound or something like that as well. And so I was just obsessed with every good film. And it really started with Criterion Collection, of just like getting on Criterion's like newsletters, and watching everything they said was good.
Hmm.
So there's a little bit in film school, like my screenwriting teacher, he was the one that made me watch Do the Right Thing, which kind of led to me watching Night of the Hunter, which we'll get into. But we'd have like 7 movies a semester, that it'd be like Aki Kaurismäki, stuff, and like really, really cool independent cinema. Um, but most of it was coming from recommendations at Blockbuster.
Yeah, for me, I think it was like I was a video store junkie when I was in high school, but it was a very small video store, and it was mostly like popcorn cinema. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't, they didn't have any foreign films, any like anything except for probably The Wizard of Oz, anything before 1975.
Wow.
So it was really like when I was a little bit older, and the Criterion Collection is how I started to discover older films, um, international films, all that art cinema, all that kind of stuff. And it's particularly how I discovered this film, Night of the Hunter.
You're a physical media person, right? Like you're not
Very much
just
so.
streaming.
Yeah, very much. I mean, I stream a lot for sure, and the Criterion channel has been a great resource and a great thing. Um, Before that, I was still going to when I lived in Los Angeles, was still going to a video store in Pasadena and like renting Criterion Blu-rays to try to see movies that I couldn't see anywhere else.
Well, a good
But
resource around here now, because there's basically no video stores, is Barnes and Noble. Like Barnes and Noble
yes,
will carry a lot of Criterion movies, and they have a Criterion section, which is really cool. So if I'm ever just wanting that movie store experience, like a Suncoast in the mall kind of vibe, sometimes I'll just go to Barnes and Noble and just browse stuff that I know I'm not going to buy anything, but I just love the feeling of thumbing through the DVD covers and stuff. Because my relationship with Criterion was from like a graphic designer art perspective. Like the posters and the covers they had, I thought were mind blowing. Like I was just like,
mm,
this is all I wanted to do was get a movie that had a Criterion cover. I didn't care if it made money in the theaters. Like as a filmmaker, I just wanted a Criterion poster. Basically, I
yeah.
wanted those two women, whoever the designers that do all the Criterion posters, make one out of one of my films, and then I'll die happy.
So for this film, or for films of this era, was it sort of I guess like this period when you started to like dive into older films? Is that kind of when you like really kind of like got into like more black and white stuff from old Hollywood and discovered those
Yeah,
kind of filmmakers?
I had a difficult time in film school getting into like Citizen Kane and Casablanca. Um, they were just too slow for me. I had ADHD, and so
I know what that's
I just
like.
wanted more engagement. And I it took me watching, I think, both Casablanca and Citizen Kane with Roger Ebert's commentary on it, and it like
Mm,
broke my brain open. Like I was just like, there is so much about these movies that can be talked about in a very accessible way, but also in a very high literate way that was like attractive to me as like a snobby kind of filmmaker. Um, because Ebert was such a great um, analytic of film, but also knew how to talk to like the every person
yeah.
and sort of break it down of like, here's what's great about deep focus filmmaking, but also why that matters to you as a viewer. What's the
Hmm.
psychology there? So once I watched that kind of with his commentary, it was kind of like open season. Then I started watching like Frank Capra movies, It's a Wonderful Life, and a lot of Hitchcock stuff, which I just recently got into in the past 5 years because I'm really into like mid-century modern and like Mad Men and stuff. And so um, I really liked like the German expressionism stuff and F.W.
Hmm.
Murnau, like real surrealist kind of things, and Jean Cocteau's like Beauty and the Beast, and things that were just like hyper surrealism was like my bag. Like
Yeah.
anything that was weird and avant-garde, I was really into.
Well, that transitions perfectly into talking about this film, because this is definitely a film with a lot of different influences, but I would describe this as like a very um, painterly film. It's a
Yeah,
very like artistic vision. It's not just like
every
a cut and
frame a
dry.
painting. Yeah, every frame's a painting. Like you can
Yes.
literally, like, on my wall I have like one of the most beautiful frames in cinema history. I've got projected because it's just like masterful storytelling. But like you can thumb through the whole film and you could probably watch it on mute. and get the
Hmm.
full story, which is so cool.
John's just plumb bad through and through.
John's bad.
Yes, John's bad.
Tell me another secret about my dad.
Oh, no, your turn.
All right, what secret shall I tell?
Where's the money hid?
John's dead.
Where's the money hid? You tell me, you little wretch, or I'll tear your arm off.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with the director Charles Lawton and his experience working in as an actor, working in silent film, working since like pretty much the beginning of the invention of cinema, and he's kind of like bringing all of his expertise or his like experience um, to this as a performer, not just as a workman actor or workman director. Because a lot of directors at this time, especially in Hollywood, have kind of been writing and directing. They've kind of been honing their craft in a very sort of, I guess, technical way.
Yeah.
And Charles Lawton is an actor. He's most well known as the original Hunchback of Notre Dame. He's in one of my favorite movies, The Old Dark House.
Oh, I haven't
Uh,
seen that.
oh, it's so good. That's a James Whale movie from like the 30s, I think.
Yeah, and I
Anyway,
think he gets compared a lot to Orson Welles,
yeah.
from that, like an actor first, but then using the same cinematographer that did was it the Magnificent Ambersons,
Hmm.
which I've
Hmm.
only seen like a little bit of that movie, but it's so
Mm.
just lush, it's like
Yes.
that cinematographer knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah, that's on Criterion too, and I have that, and I would
Really,
recommend that as well.
very cool.
Yeah, it's not a perfect film. There's definitely like it's a great study because Ambersons was like taken away from Wells, and uh, there was a lot of it that was tampered with, and you can really tell like what's the studio and what's Wells. But it's still a really fantastic movie. But yeah, this is Charles Lawton's first film as a director. He's been acting since the silent era, but this is his first film as a director, and sadly, it is his only film because he was. Sadly, this was not a success. So I think he was even slated to direct another film right after this, and the studio took it away from him because this was not a success, which is just tragic.
Yeah, I think I read it was like it was a novel called like The Naked and the Dead, I want to say,
Hmm.
like a Norman Mailer novel, which sounds really cool. And apparently, from interviews I've read, Charles was bisexual, and
Hmm.
this book I think deals with homosexuality, as well as like war and like really dark stuff. So it's a bummer to not know kind of what he would have done next, and also like what did he bring to the table compared to the people that were you know um, like his production designer and all that stuff, because it's hard to know that being his first film and being such a I don't know how else to put it, but like a masterpiece, like a visual
Yeah.
and storytelling masterpiece in my opinion. How much of that was him? Um, because it being his first time, it's hard to pinpoint what the vision was, because I I think I read that he would um, talk to the author of the book
Hmm.
that Night of the Hunter was based on and ask for him to sketch scenes
Hmm.
of the book that he could sort of mimic like as perfectly as he could, like even gestures of the characters and facial expressions and stuff like that, and like basically had the author create storyboards, which is kind of fascinating. So I, I don't know where he begins and sort of the movie takes shape. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, I mean, since this is his only film, we can only, I guess, speculate on that.
Speculate.
I think this is definitely, more of an effort than Citizen Kane for sure. Like, I mean, a group effort, um, because
I was like,
of
hold on. What are you saying?
more of a, I guess, because Kane is so lauded as the vision of one person because Orson Welles, like shot everything. No, I think Lawton deserves a lot of credit for just a lot of the vision of the film. I think the tone probably. There's a lot of humor in this movie as well, and I think Charles Laughton was a pretty funny person, at least
Yeah.
a very funny performer. Hobson's Choice is a really funny movie that he stars in. I know he was really inspired by D.W. Griffith, really inspired by a lot of silent films, and I didn't know that the first couple times I've seen this movie, and watching it again this time and kind of knowing that, it really like sort of gave me a new perspective on it, because so much of this looks like a silent film and so much of this feels like a silent film. Like you were saying earlier, like you feel like you could watch it with the sound off and still pretty much kind of figure out what's going on.
Yeah, and one of the actors, Lillian Gish, kind of famous silent film star, you always wonder kind of what that transition's like, going from silent movies to like the talkies and
Hmm.
being kind of a more subtle actor. Um, and I wouldn't call this movie subtle by any means, but there's some things that she does in this movie that are kind of like close up magic, where it's like
Yeah.
you see these looks and this kind of sternness and stuff that um, I think, you know, is them really understanding the film's medium. I mean, there's very loud performances in this movie, especially Robert Mitchum, who I'm sure we'll talk a lot about. But going from kind of the silent era to a film that utilizes sound in such a big way. I mean, there's the score itself, but also the singing in it and kind of how things
Hmm.
overlap and stuff. Like it's a very sophisticated way of storytelling with that in mind of like, well, if it just was pretty pictures, then we would have been like, well, this is just a vision of cinematography. But because there's the actors performances, the sound design, the set design, there's so many things that are firing on all cylinders. You do have to kind of think that, yeah, this is kind of a visionary's an auteur film because it
Hmm.
it all comes together really, really well.
Yeah, let's talk about the plot a little bit. I think that'll be a good segue into talking about Mitchum a little bit. So, this is I feel like this is a fairly unique story, even though I feel like it also feels familiar as well.
Well,
Um,
the thing that, like, kind of freaks me out a little bit is that they call Mitchum's character a serial killer, and
mhm,
it's like for movies back in the day, we didn't have too many of those kind of, like, serial killing movies. Like, there's,
yeah,
like, a couple, like, messed up movies like M, where it deals with, like, a child murderer or something that it's like, man, that's some dark stuff, but, like, this is Southern Gothic horror, like at its
mhm.
finest, like really, really twisted stuff. And I wonder if that's what maybe the audiences had a problem with at the time. I don't know.
It could be. I mean, I don't know how. I don't know exactly like what box you could put this in as well as far as genre,
Well,
because
you
it's
in your
kind of a
notes
horror
you had
movie.
like yeah, in your notes you had like 25 descriptors. It's like it's a religious film, it's a horror film, it's a Southern Gothic. I mean, it's so many things, right?
It's kind of a dark comedy as
Dark
well.
comedy.
Yeah, and definitely
It's a
that's
serial killer movie.
yeah, and definitely that's not really like what people are flocking to see, especially as far as like horror goes. It's mostly like like UFO films in the 1950s. It's
Or
like
creature feature
creature
kind of stuff.
features. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. So this is a very like nuanced type of film. So Robert Mitchum plays essentially a false prophet, a preacher, because the movie opens with like the line from the Bible, the beware of false prophets. Um,
Yes.
I'm I don't want to get too political on this podcast, but a couple of times in this movie, I was just like, feels a little real.
Mhm.
Anyway, he is arrested early on for stealing a car, and um, is cellmates with another character we're introduced to, a farmer who has just been arrested for robbing a bank to save his children from destitution. Um,
Okay. Can we stop down here?
yeah, yeah, go for it.
So when I was watching this scene, um, I've been on because we're not to date us, but we're right outside of October. Been watching a lot of horror movies, reading some Stephen King novels, and I was just like, this scene in the prison feels like uh, an outtake of Shawshank Redemption. It's like
Hmm.
a character overhears someone talking about something, and they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna on the outside, I'm gonna have this plan or whatever." And I was just like, a lot of this feels very Stephen King to me. And so I had to look it up. I was like, I wonder what he thinks about this movie. Did this, influence his style or any of his writings? And I saw a quote from him that was like, he thinks this is like one of the scariest movies of all time. So you watch that prison scene, and he like doesn't he yank Mitchum's character off the bunk or whatever? I mean, it's like a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
very physical scene, but also has this like delicious dialogue and stuff. And I think
Hmm.
Stephen King like loves that surprise and that like prison lingo and all that stuff.
Hmm. I love that Mitchum's character is still trying to play innocent. Like he never really like shows his hand, or at least he tries to. He's always trying to deceive somebody, even when he's in a
Which
prison cell with someone.
which I think is probably why Mitchum took that role, because when you look at interviews of him talking about the movie, um, I don't think he would have liked it playing it as just a straight bad guy. I
Uh-huh.
think it was more interesting to him to do the Jekyll Hyde performance that he
Hmm.
does in the movie.
Yeah, Mitchum has such an interesting career. I mean, he's been in so many films through, up until like the 80s. Like I think the first time I recognized him was in he's like the boss in Scrooged.
Really?
Yeah, he's like Frank Cross's like head honcho boss who
Yeah,
wants
I
like
guess
who
he
wants
just
him to
looks.
start making content for cats.
Hey, don't all our bosses want that in a perfect world?
But yeah, he's amazing in this movie as this very two-faced preacher who has clearly has very very warped ideas. I mean, in the beginning of the film we see him basically like talking to God in his while he's driving his car, kind of like, what do you want from me next, Lord? A widow? Like who basically who do you want me to kill and deceive
Yeah,
next?
yeah. It's
um
such, and you can even see like Tarantino sort of taking notes from that too, with True Romance and things like that, of just like this very, and Pulp Fiction and stuff, of like these very kind of hip, surreal conversations that don't make a lot of sense, but someone's delivering them so confidently and so in their own character that you buy it, you
yeah.
believe it.
So Mitchum's character, he finds out that this man who eventually is hanged for his crime has money hidden somewhere. His kids knows where it is, so he immediately goes right for. As soon as he's released from prison, the preacher goes right for the kids, right for the widow, and sort of like worms his way into this community,
Yeah,
using religion, using sort of like his disguise, this wolf in sheep's clothing. I like that at the beginning, they're kind of suspicious because he has love and hate tattooed on his hands. And I imagine that, like, in 1955, anyone who has a tattoo of anything would
yeah.
be extremely suspicious.
Wish I knew a little bit more of the history of that, but yeah, getting them on your fingers or your knuckles is such a hardcore thing. So for back then, a preacher having it, maybe there was less kind of stigma around it. I don't know. Um,
I would feel like there would be more stigma. Like, I feel like that would be like in 1955, that would be an extremely red flag. Um,
yeah, they in the film they make it more of a curiosity. Like it's
mhm,
just like, oh, tell us about that. One thing we didn't mention though is at the very beginning when the children's father gets picked up by the police, the kids witness it, and the young boy who watches his dad get arrested uh, basically kind of has a trauma moment. Like he
uh-huh.
kind of grabs his stomach in like an interesting way and internalizes, I think, and it comes up later in the film. But I was like, man, that's such a specific moment for them to show that, which is part of
Mm,
the story. But the acting of the kid and stuff, it's kind of like you're going like, okay, they really need a certain kind of performance from these little kids. And so that's kind of your first little hint that Lawton has to work these kids or the story's not going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting how that scene is kind of echoed again later in the film, and you see
Yes.
that sort of trauma work itself out.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and you're kind of immediately put in the perspective of this kid who has this like now sort of like responsibility, um, and he this this, I think it's funny that kids are never usually put up front when they're when the cast is being billed, like whenever, especially like opening credits, you never see like the children's names first. But this kid is really, he's the protagonist of the film. We're kind of seeing everything through his perspective, which really, like puts emphasis on that's on how the film looks. The film feels like a dream at times. It feels like a nightmare at times. um
Well, apparently they shot it in 2 units. They would shoot a lot of the stuff kind of at the house with Mitchum, kind of with Lawton and sort of the cinematographer, but then they did a second unit for like all the river stuff,
mhm.
where they're following the kids, and they shoot that from the kids' perspective, like the height of the kids and kind of what they would see imagery looking like and stuff. And so I think that note is what gives the film kind of its dreamlike quality a lot of times, as they're like, well, how would a kid experience this, or how would the protagonist? And I think that's why you get such interesting shots and stuff in the movie.
Yeah, for sure. So I don't know. I this time watching it, I was really struck by the narrative of someone using religion and using a community's belief in a type of person to really deceive them.
I thought
And
you didn't want to get political, Chris.
I didn't say anything.
Okay.
Uh, um, yeah,
I'm just saying Reaganomics feature very heavily in this movie.
yeah, to the point where he eventually like marries the mother, convinces her, and
Which is
this
wild.
happens
Wild that
happens very, very quickly,
it happens so quick. And that's
and
the
then
one
really like
note in this.
changes her personality to the point where
Yeah.
she is like preaching to people, and he's kind of
Yes.
standing back there like she's become a puppet on his, in his theater.
I gotta ask you, there's one scene that I felt kind of interesting because um, Robert Mitchum, like as a archetype actor, is a very sexy, kind of brooding man, but he plays the scene after they get married, their quote unquote honeymoon night, very anti-sex. And he's
Mhm.
like, I hope you don't expect me to be pawing all over you, and just goes in the complete opposite direction. And I wonder, obviously if that's the narrative in the novel, but it was such an interesting way to do that and kind of make this bad hip hypocritical preacher still pious in that way, or
Yeah.
like it just didn't make sense to me, and made his character weirder in my opinion, that he was
Mhm.
like go clean yourself up, and did not want to consummate the marriage. That was just like an interesting note in that performance,
Yeah, I mean, I do think I do think it kind of makes sense with his, at least his character, because
because he's just obsessed with the money.
well, I think it's that also, but he also truly believes that he is a instrument for God, that he is like been, that he, that he has this sort of like, uh, relationship with God where God is allowing him to do these terrible things. And he's, sees himself as almost a like, I don't know. I think it's a control thing, honestly.
So for
Um,
you, do you think he's more psychopathic or sociopathic? Like, does he have like a code, or is he just like completely out of his mind? Because
yeah,
he's
it's
highly
very.
functional. He's highly functional. He knows what he's doing. He's very charismatic.
Mhm.
He's like, he knows how to manipulate things.
I guess then that would maybe lean towards the sociopathic. I mean,
Yeah,
he's it's hard to for me. I was wondering what he actually intends to do with the money, um, because he does mention, like at the very beginning, like all the tabernacles he could build, or that he wants to like build a church, or he wants to, and so either maybe that's true, and he wants
right.
to do that in a way like almost like similarly to maybe the Paul Dano preacher character in There Will Be Blood,
Sure.
where he basically sees his role as a minister or his role as a church builder as a way to control people, um, or he's just completely full of crap and he's gonna like use that money for something else. I don't know. I kind of tend to think maybe it's the former rather than the latter.
I think he was going to buy that family a new car, knowing what he did to their car. So I think he just felt bad
Right.
about sending it to the bottom of that river.
Right.
Leaning, leaning, safe and secure from
Right.
all.
Well, yeah. So the mother as well as the family car does end up at the bottom of the river, and maybe the most beautiful shot in the movie, where we
So
sort of see
cool.
this reveal of um, of the mother tied to the car at the bottom of the river, and you see just like this, like I guess like seaweed, and her hair is like
Her hair
floating.
and her face is, which I think I found out it's like a mannequin, right? But with a
Mhm.
modded face on it, like a mask of Shelley Winters, the actress. But yeah, I think Guillermo del Toro is like, my whole career has been just trying to recreate that shot.
Right. Yes.
Because I think that was one of the first shots when I saw the movie where I was like, this is elevated. There's something going on here that's an artist is making this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when the
So,
first time I saw this movie, I was like, "Oh, that's extremely striking." Like, I will not forget that.
no,
Like,
and it's hard to figure out how they did it. I mean, like the way the things are flowing and getting the camera angle and all that stuff, where it's just like they probably had to do some pretty heavy experimentation to make that
mhm.
work.
Yeah, a lot of like great stage work in this film, especially as we get into like the next sequence where once Robert Mitchum starts chasing after the kids, um, which one of my favorite moments I wrote down was it's once Mitchum is like full on after him, and there's this like fisherman character that the boy kind of has gone to and has kind of been a friend to him and seems to at
Yeah,
least like believe him on stuff. He goes to him for help towards the last minute, and the guy is completely intoxicated, just falls over, passed out drunk.
yeah,
No, there's like no one left to help him. There's no adults who are going to come to his rescue, and you see him kind of like, you see almost like a switch go off in him where he goes, there's still the river, and he grabs his sister and heads towards the river. um,
yeah. Because he asks him, I think early on, I want to say about the fixing the boat, like
mhm.
the skipper or whatever. It was like, when are you going to have it fixed or whatever, and you immediately start thinking like, okay, the river is going to be involved in this. And talking about directors taking inspiration from this, did you ever see that David Gordon Green movie called Undertow?
Mm-mm.
Oh, you got to watch that. So, David Gordon Green was one of my favorite filmmakers until he started making the worst schlock in the world. But he's from Arkansas, and his
Oh,
like
I don't think I knew that.
debut film,
I've seen George Washington.
George Washington is fantastic. All the
Mhm.
Real Girls, incredible. But Undertow is such a redneck version of this movie, and there's a lot of scenes in that mirror exactly what happens in this movie. But Josh Lucas, who's also from Arkansas, does the thing with he's got a knife and he's going out into this river to get this kid, and it's just beautifully mirrors this scene.
Hmm.
But I talked earlier about him, the noises that he makes. Robert Mitchum's character in this
Yes.
movie, it's like listening to like Bruce Springsteen's like Nebraska album. These like yelps, these like
Yeah.
primal screams. And his acting, I guess, do they call it like Brechtian or something like that? Like there's a term. It's like it's not. method acting, like
Mhm.
Brando and or Stanislav. I don't know what I'm talking about, man.
You think
But it's
there's it's
like,
almost like there's almost like a meta quality to it?
yeah, or just it is different from like the Gary Cooper, who, because they originally asked Gary Cooper to be in this movie.
Yeah,
And I was
that
like,
would've
there's
been weird.
no way Gary Cooper would have been like, yo, and like making these like cartoonish wolf sounds.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
It's
and
very big, and, there are times when it's, like, so big that it's funny, and I almost
yeah,
and I do think it's intentionally that way, but then there are also times when it's just, like, so big that it's horrific.
it's
Um,
scary. Yeah. There's
yeah.
scenes where, talk about the cartoonish quality when he's chasing the kids up the stairs from the basement. He's putting his hands out like this,
Like
like
He's
following them.
Frankenstein, yeah.
Yeah. It could be laughable, but when you watch it and you think about what he's going to do, he would
Mhm.
kill them. Like,
Right.
there's nothing in his mind stopping him from killing a
Mhm.
child. And
Yeah.
so that's always in the back of your mind as he's like cartoonishly parading behind them.
Yeah,
And
I think you need a little bit of that too because the subject matter is so dark. I mean, because a lot of this movie
yeah,
is
if this was played much more subtly, like a Fincher movie, like a Zodiac,
Mhm.
it would be, it would just be like traumatic to watch. It would just be like Girl with the Dragon Tattoo or something, where you're just like, oh, the coldness of these characters
Yeah.
it's messing with my head. I don't think they could have gotten away with that back then.
And speaking of him, all the yells that he makes when he does get to the top of the stairs during that Frankenstein shot and they like
Yeah,
slam the door
puts
on his
his
hand,
fingers.
the yell
Yeah,
that he lets out sounds exactly like Yosemite Sam. I mean, it sounds
yeah,
exactly like a
it's
Looney
like
Tunes
the Goofy
cartoon.
movie. Yeah, it's like, it's so interesting to me, and I think that's why it's so watchable,
Mhm.
because he is just going for it. And you hear these stories about Mitchum, coming to set drunk. Like, one of the producers, I think, I forget what he said, but it was one of the producers had a story, because there's so many conflicting stories about, Robert Mitchum and Charles Lawton and James Agee and all this kind of stuff, which screenwriter James Agee, Levi Agee. Hey, there may be a
Your
relationship there.
grandfather.
Yeah, I hope. Gosh, I would love those royalties. But uh, apparently he badmouthed, one of the producers badmouthed Mitchum on set, saying how much of like a heathen he is and needs to chill out. And in response, Mitchum goes to his Cadillac and urinates in the front seat. He's just like totally unhinged by some accounts. And I think that steeps into the performance a little bit. You kind of get a Philip Seymour Hoffman vibe, where you're like, this guy who is living a very raw, dark lifestyle is putting a lot of that into his roles. And you don't know which came first.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that whole, down the river sequence and really, like, the feel like a lot of the second half of the movie has this very, like, fairy tale-esque, feel to it. I mean, once they eventually land at this, woman who's has all these kids that she's taking care of, it feels
Yeah,
like
it's
a
like what
M Mother
Nightmarish
Goose
Mother
type of
Goose.
thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like,
Which is
very
and that's kind of Stephen Kingy to me too, of like, it's almost like another movie starts when that happens, where you're just
Yeah.
like, whoa, we're introduced to this woman and her brood of kids like very late in the movie, but you get enough story that it doesn't feel ham-fisted. Like, it's
Mhm.
very kind of well structured in that way of like, oh, this is a different energy.
Mhm.
And now these kids have kind of an anchor to keep them safe, or what you hope is going to keep them safe. Um, but talking about some of the river shots, there's some forced perspective stuff that they do. Like, did you hear about?
Yes.
There's a shot.
Sounds like we
Most of
both
the stuff
listened to the
shot on
commentary
a
track.
stage. Yeah, most of the shots are on sound stages. which
Hmm.
is crazy.
Yeah.
And they shot a shot of Mitchum's character in silhouette riding on a horse, and it was a like a little person on like a miniature pony, and they shot it like Lord of the Rings style, forced perspective, to
Mm,
make it look kind of out of reality. You know, it's
yeah.
very storybooky, like you're saying,
And that
and I love that.
line when the kid sees him in the distance and he just very like seriously, very straight face goes, "Don't he ever sleep?" Like it's hilarious, but also I felt that like deep in my soul, like when
Yeah,
when it's
it's Jason Voorhees, you know, just coming after
yeah.
these kids relentlessly.
I know, and it's like, yeah, I mean, I feel like it's like deeper than that. It's just like the continuing struggle of life of evil forces or things that will come that will always be after us. I mean, he is basically like death, like he is
Yeah,
always going to
um,
come after them. He'll never sleep.
and I hate that I'm talking about Stephen King so much because
No, it's fine.
uh, I'm listening to a podcast about the Dark Tower series, and he calls it the Wheel of Ka. You know, it's like life is a wheel, and it just keeps spinning and cycling or whatever. And so, um, when we get to the end, we can kind of talk about, the reveal of, that he's, done this to what, like 25 or 75 widows or something like
Yeah,
that. Like, this is not his first rodeo doing this
right.
trick. Sick stuff, man.
And it takes an old lady with a shotgun to bring him down.
Yeah, and there's a scene that I had up on my wall earlier, like that. I don't know if they did it with like a split diopter, very filmmaking terms, I know, but like the perspective of having her in frame, sitting in the chair,
Yeah.
kind of in backlit silhouette, and then him outside with a lamp. It's like I don't know filmmakers today, aside from maybe like the Coen brothers and Fincher, that are making shots that
Hmm.
revelatory and staged so perfectly. I think you and I both have a love for Wes Anderson, who the symmetry and stuff in this movie
Yeah.
can feel that way, but the sort of noirish elements, where light and dark is used so well.
Yeah, that chiaroscuro lighting,
Yeah.
especially that scene when they like reveal the barn and the house when they come up on that in the river. It's so beautiful. I mean,
Yeah.
between this movie and like stuff Hitchcock was doing with Rear Window, I mean, I
Ugh.
think the most magic was ever done with films was being done in the 1950s in these like giant Hollywood studio warehouses where they
Which
just
is
had
funny,
every
because I think,
element to play with.
yeah, I think the river scene was in a studio,
Oh yeah, they
and
would.
they
These
had
studios were
Mitch.
ginormous. I mean, they would build entire rivers and lakes, and like Rear Window. Hitchcock built an entire like city little circle little apartment block with like a street in the background. It had cars in the deep background, like driving by. It's
And
crazy.
he built a miniature of it too, so it would show up in the reflection of
Yeah.
Jimmy Stewart's character's binoculars,
Yep.
which is really cool. Just
Yeah.
smart, creative filmmakers. I love it so much.
Yeah, so another thing I wanted to mention was the ending, because Mitchum's character has this sort of like horror, like he's both terrifying, but he's also sort of comedic at the same time. And what happens to him, feel like at the end feels like very Coen Brothers, where he is very like taken down pretty fairly easily by this woman with a shotgun,
Yeah,
and then like hoisted up by his own petard, and then the all of the people who he like convinced or swindled with his
hang
yeah
him.
or yeah chanting hang him, which almost felt like some sort of like like topical commentary or something, uh just on how people can be swayed, I guess, easily. But
Yeah, exactly. Like that mob mentality and stuff. It reminded me a little bit of like Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Just
yeah.
like this kind of hangman lust kind of thing that's going on.
Hmm.
Even the kids, I think, at the beginning sing a song about the kid's father, about hanging. And they're like, I can't remember how the song goes, but it's like hangman, and it's almost like a nursery rhyme. It's really dark stuff.
Well, we've touched on it a little bit, and I feel like I've kind of iterated a little bit about my answer, but specifically for you, why do you think this movie is still important today? Like, if you were pitching this on people who don't necessarily watch a lot of old movies, like why would you think that this movie is worth looking at?
Because I think it highlights all the things we love about cinema, right? The visuals, the sound design, the storytelling, the structure, the performances. I mean, it's just such a um, interesting movie. Like, it's not boring at all. It's very brisk in the way that it tells you exactly what you need to know. There's not a lot
Hmm.
of fat in it, and so it just feels like a really compact, sharp, highly visual experience. And I think I could show this to my 11-year-old and say, this is a new Netflix show that they just did in black and white, and they wouldn't believe it, which is smart. But it has that vibe of like what's his name, Mike Flanagan, kind of macabre storytelling, where it's hitting on all cylinders, and it's broad enough that a lot of people I think would really like it. And so I know critics have come around to it, but I'd really love to see newer generations kind of pick up on this film because, like you said, there's humor in it. It's funny and startling, and uh, uh, darn it, it's memeable. You can make memes out of this.
90 or 92 minutes. This movie is only like an hour and 32 minutes, and there's so much
So
in it.
it
It's
flies by.
packed with so much stuff. Like,
Yeah, yeah. But it's to me, it's just it is like for me as a visual artist who loves just kind of trying to figure out how they did stuff. um it's a lot to think about, like it's a lot to sort of digest, but you can also just watch it for what it is, and it can be kind of a popcorn horror movie night kind of thing. So I think multiple people can get different things out of it.
yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I've only shown this movie to a couple people, but it's always been received like super super well.
I
One
just kind of
filmmaker,
forget about it, like, when Halloween and stuff rolls around, or, like, when
well,
someone's like, "Yeah, I'm into horror movies and stuff," or, serial killer stuff, because it's just like you said, it fits so many different genres.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't. Yeah, maybe that's kind of why one, like we touched on earlier, why this movie didn't like hit really big when it came out, and two, it's not really like a movie that fits into like a really good box of like, oh, you like horror movies, you should watch this one, or
Yeah.
like, if anything, I've seen some people be like try to put this into a Christmas movie category since there's
Well,
Christmas,
there was a Christmas scene sort of towards the end, and I was
right?
like, "Well, man, I'm gonna watch this around Christmas just because it's like Die Hard, It's like a anti-Christmas. The song that the little girl sings, Pearl, who I call Pell.
Pal, she
Her
says it like that,
the
pal.
way she talks is so cute. I mean, I'm sure some people are like, "That is so annoying," but I love it because my daughter used to talk like that, and she used to say when she was really young, she would call herself a "gel" instead of a girl,
Miguel.
and it
That's
sounds
funny.
like she's from, like, a different country, and so, she sings that song, I think it's called, like, "Pretty Fly" or whatever, like, on the river, and it's a
Mhm.
very somber, melodic, beautiful song, and it's not even the girl's real singing voice. They dubbed it
Yeah.
with a singer, and it's just so macabre and gothic, and
Mhm.
it's delicious. I just think it's so freaky and beautiful at the same time. I love it.
This might be one of the most influential movies of its era, like, certainly for, like, a certain set of filmmakers that came after it, like Del Toro, Spike Lee, even Stephen King, as you said. We were talking about filmmakers that, like, maybe sort of, like, make films like this today, because that's one thing I was thinking of when watching it was like, man, you just don't see movies that look like this, that really go for the big artistic swing of like I have a very visual specific vision. One I was thinking of was like kind of Robert Eggers a little bit.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
like especially like The Lighthouse. Like
the
that's a movie that has a
Such
very
a Lighthouse is such a great analog to this movie.
mhm.
Um, I would say the Witch or the Vivitch, however you pronounce, depending on your reading of that Old English. Um, Not as much, but I think Nosferatu, the new movie, is going to do that really heavily, just from images I've seen in the
Yeah,
trailers and stuff.
very excited.
But I mean, Del Toro, you know, I love Del Toro, or at least I did for a while. Um, I don't think he's really captured that because, like, I love Shape of Water and Hellboy. I think those are great films, but the visual, like, not since Pan's Labyrinth, maybe has he really kind of like took my breath away with like
Hmm.
visual stuff. And then what was it, Nightmare Alley, kind of one of
Yeah.
his more recent films. It's sort of harkened back to old Hollywood in a very similar way. I mean, it's gorgeous to look at, but it's not as like revelatory. And I think it
Hmm.
gets harder and harder to do as film goes on and on. I think the Coen brothers are still good at it. I recently watched Inside Llewyn Davis, and that film has a lot of like just subtle but still iconic cinematography in it, and
Hmm.
Serious Man, and so I think the Coen brothers, which they are no more, right? And we don't know if they're going to get back together or not. But
Time will tell.
the visuals of what they do, I think, still harkens back to that. But yeah, as far as younger filmmakers, I don't know. Maybe what's his name that did Hereditary, and Ari
Ari Aster.
Ari Aster.
Hmm.
Think about like Hereditary, and then the
Midsummer.
Midsummer. Yeah, exactly. And I don't know what to think about Bo is Afraid. I've been 2 years still processing that movie, and uh, visually, there's some great things about it. But
Not
yeah,
sure
it's
he knows what. I'm not sure Ari Aster knows what to think about
probably
it.
probably not. Again, and what I consider a dark comedy and a horror. I mean, I never laughed so hard in a theater for the first third of Bo is Afraid. And drawing parallels, Joaquin Phoenix, I feel like, is very similar to Robert Mitchum. He
Hmm.
has this very bodily, guttural, emotional, grounded, but big performances in a lot of his films
Yeah.
that you don't see many actors like Robert Mitchum anymore that are sort of going for it, but can be scary and charming all at the same time.
There's like a there's a Christmas movie starring Robert Mitchum with Janet Leigh. Holiday Affair.
Holiday Affair,
Yeah.
romantic
Uh,
comedy.
well, I don't remember there being a lot of laughs in it. Honestly, I think it's just more of a kind of like rom com type of film. But
Sure.
it's very weird watching Robert Mitchum try to be like the male lead in the movie.
I would just say Night of the Hunter. Um, it's it is one of those films, or I guess I would say it akin to like a one hit wonder, like pop song or something, where you're just like, how did that person come in and make such an incredible gift to the world and then not do anything else, with that gift?
Hmm.
And it makes me sad, but it is also magical because what if they had kind of an Orson Welles kind of career where it's like you make two or three like okay, very strong movies, and then you just fizzle into making Reuniti commercials or whatever, and it's like
Oh, the French
the
champagne.
French. So in a way, you get that kind of James Dean effect of like, well, we only have this small body of work to look at, and that makes it more iconic. The Marilyn Monroes and the stuff like that. It's like, this being a singular piece from Lawton to me makes it more interesting.
Hmm.
I'm curious what he would have done, but also just the mystery is fun to think about, like what could have
Hmm.
been.
What could have been, indeed. Welp, I know what could have been for now, which is we're gonna wrap things up.
Like a Christmas present from Charles Lawton at the end of a movie for one of the orphan children,
Yeah,
which I think was a brooch. I was what was the I forgot the jewelry
the
thing that
boy gets a watch, doesn't he?
the boy gets a watch, but she gives a something to the older daughter, and I forgot what it was, and I was like, I guess that's a good button for this scene, but whatever.
I just remember her telling all the other kids, "All right, your presents are like in the dining room cabinet. Go get them."
Yep.
I'm just like, okay, that's kind of weird.
Yeah, I
Don't
hid
remember my
the.
parents ever being like, okay, your presents are in the closet. Go get them out.
I think she still had PTSD from like a man showing up and stealing things, so she's got to
Okay.
hide the presents.
If you are interested in seeing this film and you haven't seen it before, well, we just spoiled it all for you, but I think you'd still get a lot out of it. So go check it out. Night of the Hunter can be found streaming on the Criterion channel. It's on MGM Plus as well if you have that. I couldn't figure out how to get MGM Plus, so I don't have that. I'm too old and don't know how to work apps. Or you could get a physical copy. This film was released on 4K recently from Criterion and Kino Lorber, so you have a lot of options. I'm sure it's at your local library, so go check it out. All right, Levi, is there anything you wanna plug? Anything you wanna promote for yourself or
Uh,
talk about?
you know, I told you off pod that I'm doing this thing on my Instagram, recommending what I call cozy core movies or comfort movies, kind of with the state of the world. And even me, I'm just an anxious mess, and I kind of had to tell
Mhm.
you, I was just like, anxiety's been hitting me hard lately, and so I follow the Mister Rogers set of advice of like look for the helpers when stuff like this happens, and
Yeah.
so I've been putting recommendations out on my Instagram for movies that maybe for the next couple minutes we can go over some of those, but you know, The Straight Story with from David Lynch, I'd never seen before, and I'm watching all his movies right now, and I was just like, man, this is like the comfiest movie in the world. It's super low stakes. It's an amazing performance by Richard Farnsworth, and you just watch it and your heart fills with joy. And so I kind of use that movie as like a template to give recommendations for movies that people could watch. And so I think I've done maybe like 10 so far. But if you want, you can follow me. I think it's Levi AG on Instagram at Levi, LEVIAGEE. Some places I'm known as Levi Film. But yeah, I've been given some like Studio Ghibli movie recommendations. There's a film by Wim Wenders called Perfect Days that is also
Great, great
equally
movie.
beautiful and slow, and just I'm trying to settle people's nervous systems with cinema. So if I was put on the planet to do anything, maybe that's what I'll be known for. Is just how to calm yourself after a day of chaos with a nice warm movie.
I've been thinking about Perfect Days a lot lately.
You know,
That's a film that stays with you.
apparently it was also going to be called the Tokyo Toilet Company or something like that. And like I think about an alternate world where that was the title of that movie and how different things would be, but I can't recommend it enough. I also watched one, I think Miss Harris Goes to Paris, that's also very similar. Just these like kind of Paddington 2 style, like
Hmm.
elevated but not overthinky. Because when you ask people what are your comfort movies, sometimes a comfort movie can be stressful, like Lord of the Rings. Like I will watch
Right.
the extended edition of the Two Towers because nostalgia and it just makes me feel good. But I'm not going to recommend that to somebody who's having a nervous breakdown to calm them down. So
Maybe like the first 30 minutes when they're in Hobbiton.
Yeah, I mean, Fellowship is a very calming movie,
Yeah.
absolutely. But I'm trying to think of things that are kind of universal, and that if anybody picked this up, it would feel good and leave them in a better mood than maybe they started with.
I was looking on Letterboxd because I also made a list a few years ago of comfort films.
Oh, lovely.
A lot of them have a very similar vibe, but I also have some that are just like very me specific, like
Yes.
Fellowship of the Ring, Hot Fuzz.
Yeah, so maybe we do a spin-off podcast and it's called Cozy Core or something like that. Who knows?
hmm Yeah, for sure. Well, cool. Go follow Levi on Instagram and watch some cozy core movies if you're feeling stressed about the events of the world. Uh, movies are a great escape and also a great cathartic experience to to lose yourself in. All right. Well, we love old movies. I'm sure you do too. If you're listening to this, you can reach out to us through Classic Cinema Society Pod at gmail.com. You can send us a message. You can send us a question. You can send us whatever you want to, and we'll probably read it on the podcast. Make sure to subscribe and share this podcast. One of the best ways to help us is to leave us a 5-star review. It's really the best way to help us reach more classic movie nerds like you. Levi, thank you for joining me.
This was a blast, man. I was really thinking I was going to come on here and poop the bed, but you made it so easy and rekindled my joy of talking about cinema. So I'm so glad you're doing this, man, and bringing people together on stuff that hopefully more people will appreciate, because like there's just it's like the sea, right? It's a world of undiscovered joy out there of watching stuff that came out before you were born.
That's all I want, to spread the joy. All right, well, thank you, dear listener. We'll see you later. Good night.
Bye.